a vision of leadership, a vision of tackling issues honestly, a vision of looking forward longer term, a vision for our children, a vision for the next generation of Californians so that they can enjoy the very same quality of life that we've all been privileged to enjoy these number of years. So I don't have a lot to say. I feel like I talked a lot for almost an hour, and I just want to say thank you to all of my supporters, and I just couldn't, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And we'll continue to go on the campaign trail and talk about whatever issues people want to talk about. And I want to say thanks especially to my staff who's right here, to our staff. I don't like using the word my, because this is a team effort. And I look at Michelle and Yolanda and Grace and Michelle. We have three Michelles now. I'm not sure. We have to figure out a nickname for each one. And I'm just grateful to everybody. Cynthia, and I'm looking out, I want to make sure I don't forget anybody. But everybody worked so hard to prepare for this, to make sure that we were thoughtful and thorough, and that we addressed every single issue. And I think we did that. So I'm sure that the press has a couple of questions, even though I think I kind of said my piece. But
Mr. Simon, you addressed the issue of reproductive rights today. On the issue of the governor's role in the enforcement of abortion clinics and access to abortion, during the primary you sent out a letter to pro-life supporters mentioning your concern for regulations on abortion clinics and your belief that women should be better informed about possible health problems in relation to abortion. Can you assure women that as governor you would do nothing to restrict access to abortion or increase restrictions or laws that restrict abortion or waiting periods?
Carla, I've said, publicly, and I was so glad today to have an opportunity to talk about abortion. And I got a little chuckle from the audience because I think people thought that was probably the subject that I didn't want to talk about.
It has been.
Pardon me? Was that, John?
It has been.
Yeah, no, I think what I've tried to say all along the campaign trail is I'm willing to set forth my position, and I just don't want to dwell on it. And when I've been around the campaign trail for 14 to 16 months, I've listened to the issues that people most often raise, and it's issues related to the economy and schools and our quality of life. But in the area of abortion, I think I've been clear, Carla, that when I take an oath to uphold the law, that's what I'm going to do. The statement that I gave today, was very thoughtfully crafted so that it would address, these kinds of issues that do come up. And John's right, they do come up frequently especially during press interviews. And I'm going to uphold the law.
Bill, you have an answer to
Bill, Mr. Simon, could you just, are you saying you would not then move to tighten the restrictions on access or regulations to abortion clinics?
I have said, Carla, that I'll uphold the law and I will not be an activist governor, when it comes to abortion. And my issues, and I won't go through them because I know you've heard them so many times, are the economy in our schools and our roads and our water and our power.
Bill, you're talking about a health care issue. We have 6.8 million people in California who do not have health care, including over 1 million children. What is your thoughts about addressing that concern?
Well, Larry, it's a very important issue, and there's a couple of things that we can do. We need to look, as I mentioned in the speech, at possibly some form of tax deduction for medical care that's provided by doctors to people that may not be able to afford it. And I know, for example, we have a healthcare task force, and one of the members of our task force, his name is Dr. David Feinberg. He's at the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA. He has said that on average, he takes about 25% of his patients, his Medi-Cal patients, and of that 25% on average, he has to pay out $100 to take care of them because he gets reimbursed $34, and it costs about $134 on average. So we've got to give them an incentive, to continue to do what in effect is pro bono work. That's one way to reduce the number of uninsured.
Bill, one more.
Another thing that we might think about, one thing we have to think about is the strain that's on our emergency rooms right now in our trauma centers, because that's the last resort for people that are uninsured, because right now emergency rooms and trauma centers have to take those people.
80% of those emergency rooms are operating in the red right now.
I know.
There's a $24 billion mandatory seismic retrofit program.
Right.
It's the kind of number we hear with the budget deficit. Would you release some of that obligation to maybe stretch out the time frame for compliance with that mandate?
You know, I think that I would be willing to take a close look at it. You know, I was on the board of Children's Hospital here in Los Angeles for 8 years, and they've got a sizable retrofit obligation. And it's kind of a double whammy in the way that in order to retrofit, now you're back to ground zero in effect, because you've done your capital campaign and you've raised a lot of money, but you've had to cover an obligation that hasn't necessarily given you state-of-the-art facilities. So if you look, for example, at Children's Hospital, that's going to be about a $400 or $500 million project to retrofit it, and they're not able to spend that money on new equipment. So it's something that we ought to take a hard look at. And you've got to be safe. I'm not suggesting that you violate any of the retrofit laws, but maybe there are ways to do it so that we can relieve the burden on these hospitals, because they're not operating, as you mentioned, profitably on an operating basis. And then on a capital expenditure basis, they've got to retrofit, and on top of that, they've got to bring in the new machinery, the state-of-the-art, the MRI equipment, the newest of the new. And so, there are pressures from every direction. Then on top of that, you've got the insurance problem. So all that is straining. I talked about restoring the patient-doctor relationship, during the forum today. All that straining, that's all the pressure that reduces the ability of doctors and patients to have a meaningful relationship.
You talked about judges, and you talked about upholding the Constitution and the law today, but you didn't address the issue of funding. What I'm wondering is all of the state funding that is now provided for abortion-related services, reproductive rights, contraception, etc., would you support continuing all of that funding, or is some of it funding that you would want the state to stop?
My understanding, Michael, is that's all constitutionally protected in California. So I don't think that's an issue. As I say, I think when you say you're going to uphold the law, that covers an awful lot of ground.
Right now, we have the ongoing hearings in Sacramento, joint legislative hearings on the Oracle contract. From your observation, do you see any smoking gun or direct link to the one and only Governor Gray Davis in these hearings?
Well, obviously the appearances are very troubling. No question about that. And I'm glad that JLAC is doing an investigation. I think that we ought to continue. I think the Attorney General should continue to investigate, and I don't think it'd be inappropriate for the U.S. Attorney to look at it, because the appearances are awfully troubling. And, I don't, as a former federal prosecutor, I don't like to rush to judgment and to rush to conclusions. And I think it's probably premature to make any conclusions. But there's enough smoke there, as I think Governor Davis himself acknowledged, that you ought to see if there's fire.
Did you give any?
For women who don't want to own their business, I know you talked about bringing women up to be business owners, but for those who just want to work 9 to 5 and support their family, what will you do if you are governor to create an equal pay for them and make sure that it's enforced?
Well, I think we'll have to look into that pretty closely, because ultimately so much of it is in the enforcement. You can have all the laws in the world, but if they're not being enforced, that doesn't do you much good. And I must admit, when I got the question today, I was just as surprised at the statistic as the questioner was. The questioner, you may recall, was surprised, and I was too.
Does the state have the ability to pass legislation that says women will be paid the same amount as men?
I don't know. I'd have to take a look at it.
Well, what about an executive order
I think they probably, I don't see why they couldn't, to be honest.
What about an executive order in your, if you were elected governor, and your administration saying women will get paid the same amount as men? Would you be willing to sign that?
Yeah, I would.
Did you give any?
For the same, according to the principles I outlined in my remarks today, absolutely.
Time for about 2 more questions.
Did you give any consideration to not coming to the hotel today?
Yeah, I've had my hand up for a while. Mr. Simon, you have been quoted in the press as saying that you would not have signed the gay rights bills that Governor Davis has signed. Is that accurate? And if so, how do you intend to appeal to the gay and lesbian voters of California?
Well, I wouldn't have signed it. It was AB 25 because I just didn't think it was appropriate for the government to be inquiring into the bedroom, inquiring into people's sexual orientation and base rights on that.
How are you going to appeal to gay and lesbian voters, though?
With the same set of policies that, I believe will appeal to a broad variety of Californians, and an understanding and a tolerance goes along with it.
Did you give any consideration to not?
Let's give Eric a chance.
Did you give any consideration to not coming to today's event because of the picketers, and what did you think of Governor Davis's decision not to attend?
Eric, I really didn't give it any consideration in terms of not coming to the event. I committed to come, and I was glad. I was actually hoping that Governor Davis would be here, and I'm sorry that he's not here. The appearances, don't look good to me. It appears as if, his priorities are that he doesn't want to annoy a male-dominated union who's been a big contributor to his campaign in favor of a very important women's forum. So I think the facts speak for themselves, and I think Governor Davis has to live with the impression that he created. Not only I thought it was a great event myself. I was very proud and privileged to be here, and I thought it was a very useful discussion.
Would that be a
Thank you,
quota
everybody.
at 50%? You threw out a number. You said that Gray Davis has hired 27% of his appointees have been women. You said you'd shoot for a higher mark, 50%. Is that a quota? Is that hard and fast?
No, it's not hard and fast.
Davis
Okay,
is saying that
thank you.
you don't have a budget for him. He said this last week. He
Yeah,
said,
I know.
if Bill will show me a budget, and then I'll reconsider mine. What's your
I know.
reaction to that?
He said, hello. That was certainly gubernatorial. Hello. I showed him a budget last September. If he followed that, he wouldn't be in the mess he's in today. At some point, he's got to act like a governor. And he's got to stop saying, he said yesterday, he was the only one of 35 million Californians who submitted a plan. Is he now mad at all Californians, including myself, for not having submitted a plan? I don't get it. I mean, he's the governor. I gave last September a budget that was full and fair and actually anticipated exactly what happened. And we talked about on the campaign trail so much of what happened. Here's a case where Governor DeLay just really sat around and didn't do anything. It's the same thing as on the energy crisis, where he could have done something. And he could have said, okay, I'm going to take action. But the facts are, at the time, everybody knew the economy was softening. It was no surprise to anybody that our tax revenues were declining. Why he now comes out and says that everybody, quote, owes him a plan? I think if he had acted...
What are you going to do? You've got
Thanks, sir.
sorry.
No, I think if he had acted...
about secession, Jamie.
Yeah, we need more.
You get your hair in LA, or how do you feel about secession? You've got about secession. And don't say it's a local issue, because it has statewide implications.
Shirley, I'm not prepared to give you a position today on secession.
Will you be prepared at some point?
I do think it's a local issue, but being a local citizen...
It engages a significant percentage of the state's electorate, and it will have a political and economic impact on the state. So it is far more than a local issue. And you are an Angelino.
Shirley, I agree with you. I am an
Sherry.
Incomes for California are down. The deficits are up. What are you gonna?
Hold on.
Wait a minute.
No, Sherry had a question. And I will take that under advice. I'll take that into consideration.
Okay, we have to go.
Incomes for the state, though, are way down, projected by LAO for over $100 billion just in some short deficit fall. Now we've got $24 billion that we're in debt from Governor Davis. If you're elected governor, how are you going to change any of that?
Well, over time, we're going to have to try to create some kind of a reserve. I mean, I put together a budget plan which talked very clearly about stimulating the economy, through capital gains cut, regulatory burden cut, streamlining workers' comp. And then over the course of time, when the economy rebounds, which it will at some point, nobody has repealed the business cycle. Well, the economy will come back. And at that point, then we shouldn't spend the money like we did in the last 3 years when you grew at 37%, when your underlying rate of growth was about 12%. Over the last 25 years, tax revenues have increased on average per year 8%. So anytime you go above that, you're taking a gamble that the economy is going to continue still going up.
So you say no vehicle tax, as Governor Davis has proposed?
I've said from the very beginning that I would not raise taxes were I in Governor Davis's position. And my plan that I offered last September didn't raise taxes. And, I believe that Californians are taxed enough. I haven't run into anybody who wants to pay more taxes, except for the people up in Sacramento.
Okay.